All right. Shabbat Shalom, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another sermon here at Nazarene Way Church. Now, I realize what all of you are thinking, especially the Christians, the Catholics, who are unindoctrinated into the reality of the Nazarenes and the Nazarene Way and Nazarene Way Church. What we are doing here is we are restoring the first century sect of the Nazarenes. This is the sect that Jesus was a part of, that Jesus's disciples were a part of, meaning the people that actually walked with Jesus. I'm not talking about Paul of Tarsus, who is a man who never even knew Jesus, never walked with him, and essentially concocted Christianity, at least his followers did. We are restoring the beliefs, the practices, and the spirit of the first century Nazarenes. Later on, they became known as the Ebionim, which in Hebrew means essentially the poor ones, and they're known as the Ebionites. And so, given that we are committed to doing this, the first question I hear from a lot of commenters and a lot of people is, why do you have a Christmas tree in the background if you claim to not follow the practices of Christianity, of Catholicism? If you are here to restore the actual practices of Jesus, then why do you have a Christmas tree back there? Because obviously we know that Jesus never had a Christmas tree in his house. He never actually celebrated Christmas. Well, I'll tell you why we have this Christmas tree back here. And yes, I know that it comes from a pagan roots. It comes from, I believe, Saturnalia and winter solstice and essentially the Roman pagan traditions at the time. So instead of me asking you the question of well, if you're Christian, then why do you celebrate a obviously pagan holiday, pagan tradition? Instead of me going down that rabbit hole, I want to tell you quite plainly and simply and a straightforward answer for why there is a Christmas tree back there. There are two clear reasons. Number one is my wife loves Christmas. She loves the red flannels. She loves the red Starbucks cups. She loves Christmas tree. She loves the lights. She loves ornaments. She loves all that stuff. That's the first reason why. The second reason why is because I am a smart man. You see, I am a smart man, and I am smart enough to know that instead of me being like all of the internet trolls out there and beating your chest and saying, well, Christmas is a pagan holiday, and it's based off of old Yule, and Santa Claus isn't a real character, he was invented in the 1800s. I've let that go, and I've realized one thing. A man's number one job, if he is smart, is to make his wife happy. So in our house, yes, we have Christmas decorations. We have a Christmas tree here. I have a 1-year-old. He's getting presents, and they're all wrapped and all that stuff. What you will not see, however, I do want to point out, is the following. We know that the Nazarenes and Jesus' earliest disciples and, Jesus and, Jesus himself didn't even believe this. And that is, they never believed in the quote-unquote the nativity story, the whole three wise men, the whole virgin birth concept. And we know this because the writings that we have that have survived thanks to the patristics, meaning the church fathers and people like Epiphanius and Eusebius, we know from these people and Hegesippus and early Nazarene that the gospel and the original text used by Jesus' disciples, but more importantly, the disciples of his disciples that actually walked with Jesus, was actually called the Gospel according to the Hebrews. And the Gospel according to the Hebrews was very similar to the Gospel of Matthew. Thanks, Fiona, for joining us. Except that there was one difference. It was missing the first 2 chapters of Matthew. What does the first 2 chapters of Matthew contain? Well, it contains this long lineage of Jesus' birth, meaning his family tree, and it also contains the nativity myth, the nativity story, which was concocted by a misreading of Isaiah 7:14, a mistranslation. After it was translated from Hebrew to Greek, the translator at the time, I believe it was the Septuagint, mistranslatted translated the word, I think, ama, which I don't know if that's actually how to pronounce it or even if that's the right word, but it starts with an A and it sounds like that. Anyway, they translated the Hebrew word, which means young maiden or young woman, to young virgin. And so a lot of the people thought that, well, oh, the Messiah is supposed to be born of a young virgin. And what's also funny is that that verse was taken out of context. It didn't even actually refer to the coming Messiah, the man that came to restore the original teachings and the way and the love that God wanted us to understand about him. And that is why, we don't find it in the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew or the Gospel of the Hebrews. It was not ripped out. It was not even invented. And it's also why Mark, the first and oldest Greek gospel that we have in full, does not contain anything about the virgin birth. So what you will not see on that Christmas tree is you will not see any nativity element, no worshiping of Mother Mary as a virgin goddess, who the Catholics turn into an idol and worship her. You will not see any of that stuff. So if you are a Nazarene and you are married and you have a wife who loves Christmas, well, I suggest you celebrate it just like everyone else. Even the Christians and Catholics really celebrate it. Not as a religious holiday, but as a secular holiday, as a societal holiday, just as it was a long time ago before the Catholic dogma took that popular holiday and ensconced and injected their own theology into it. So what you will see here is a non-dogmatic, non-Catholic, Christian dogmatic Christmas tree right here. And I don't think Jesus would object to that. The other thing that Jesus would not object to, as my friend Cameron Waters of Christspiracy, the co-director of Christspiracy, pointed out, is they would also not object to the fact that Nazarenes and Ebionites, who were vegetarian, would not eat and slaughter and raise 60 million hogs, pigs, to be slaughtered, tortured, killed, and eaten, and their corpse and carcass discarded on the day of Jesus' birth. To honor the mythological birth of Jesus that was ensconced and injected into a pagan Greek holiday by slaughtering and eating 60 million plus pigs on that day is quite disgusting and something that Jesus would come back at and be dismayed about. So instead of getting hung up on the idea that there's a Christmas tree in the background, I would rather you get hung up on the idea that having a Christmas tree in the background is a heck of a lot better than slaughtering and eating a ham on Christmas Day. As a Nazarene and as a vegetarian and as someone that is plant-based and whose entire family, including my 1-year-old, does not slaughter and kill and eat flesh, I will say this to you. As a challenge, why not try to practice the commandment of thou shalt not kill on Christmas? How's that for a concept? Okay, so with that out of the way, we're going to segue directly into today's sermon, which is titled, and hopefully you can see this, and if not, I'll read it out to you here, is Christians have gotten it wrong for 2,000 years? Question mark. Yes, and here's why. Okay, so the background on today's sermon, it actually stems from this idea. You see, over and over again, I get the same wandering Catholics and ortho bros and Christians stumbling into this YouTube channel. Not only this YouTube channel, but the YouTube channels of my friends, my fellow Nazarenes, people like Aaron Abke, James Benefico, David Nostrati, if I pronounce his name right, Connor of Old World, Florida, Christian Sartain, of the Essene Ebionite uh, YouTube channel. All the links, I'm butchering the pronunciation, you can check in the description below. Anyway, I see the same thing happen over and over again, wherein Christians and Catholics cannot counter the data, the research, and the arguments laid forth by myself, fellow Nazarenes, and fellow scholars. So, what do? Well, they resort to ad hominem attacks and a completely ridiculous appeal to the lack of logic, which is, all right, well, I see all of your points, but you're telling me you guys have just figured it out and we've gotten it all wrong for 2,000 years? Sure, Sherlock. What are you going to tell me next? Huh? Well, here's the reality. People thought the world was flat for 70,000 years before the data and the science actually showed otherwise. Why should it be no different when discovering that what you hold dear and what you were indoctrinated into from before you can even walk, talk, or barely breathe, meaning at baptism, is actually incorrect? It is actually about 20% of it is flat out errant. It's flat out false, and we have the data to show it. So, I'm going to walk through just one instance, one example with you today of why Christians have gotten it wrong for 2,000 years in terms of their theology, in terms of their beliefs. You may think that, hey, if the Nazarenes and the Ebionites and what you're teaching, Scott, meaning, or what Aaron Abke is teaching, or what Cameron Waters are teaching, you may be thinking to yourself, well, if you guys were actually right, then we would have been taught that for 2,000 years, and the majority in the right opinion would have ruled. Well, that's not actually the case, and here's why. You see, the overall idea is that, we'll come back to that, is that, and I've heard it, before, and I'm going to try to, explain this in a little bit better light, but history truly does belong to the victors, and the texts and the scrolls and the writings and the societies and the preserved artifacts of the cultures who were conquered were routinely, consistently, and vehemently destroyed by their conquerors. So the fact that a poor Galilean group called the Nazarenes, their texts, which were a very small and emerging group at the time, did not survive, wherein the texts and opinions and the culture and the dogma and doctrine of the Roman pagan superpower at the time has survived, should be surprising to no one. Okay, so let's move along here. So where does the teachings and the ideas that I'm sharing with you as a fellow Nazarene, and people like Aaron Abke and Cameron Waters and James Benefico and all the other Nazarenes listed, where does our quote unquote ideology, where do our standings, our conclusions come from? Well, they don't come from personal opinion. We didn't just sit around and invent this one day because we took a look at the negative underbelly of the institutionalized religion of Christianity and just concoct our own idea. It comes from academic scholarship, people like James Tabor, Robert Eisenman, even John P. Meyer, who I talked about in my sermon last week. Every single scholar, every single biblical scholar, New Testament scholar, that is where we are piecing all of this stuff together. And if you actually do the reading outside of the quote-unquote Holy Bible that you were given in some Southern Baptist church and told to raise over your head and scream, "God hates fags," instead of basing all of our beliefs on what some psychopathic pastor says. We base our beliefs not only on reading the text of the literature that Jesus read, we read the texts of the surrounding literature and what scholars have to say about how, why, when these pieces, these ancient critical texts were written. We look at the hermeneutics. We utilize different scholarly tools, hermeneutics, exegesis, literary criticism to pull out and unearth and piece together what actually happened. We look at patristic sources. We look at first, second, third, fourth, fifth century writings from even Catholics to figure out what happened. And we look at suppressed traditions. So, like I've covered, the common objection I see on not just my YouTube channel, but a lot of people's YouTube channels is an appeal to the idea that for some reason, the fact that every single other person is brainwashed into believing what they believe, that all of a sudden makes it correct and makes it right. The fact is that, essentially, there was at one point in time, 100% of the people on the planet, 100% of the Homo sapiens on the planet believed that the world was flat. If you believed the world was flat, well, guess what? That doesn't make it actually right, and that doesn't make it actually true. We are interested in truth. That's why you are here. That's why you are watching the Nazarene Way Church channel right now. That's why you're listening to me. What we are on a mission to do at Nazarene Way Church, my fellow Nazarenes, is we want to get closer to living and practicing and believing and observing the same practices that Yeshua, aka Jesus, observed. That's it. We're basically Jesus maximalists. We are not Paul of Tarsus maximalists. We are not Pope maximalists. We are not the Catholic Catechism maximalists. We do not pander and observe and follow whatever society and whatever the popular religion or sect of Christianity happens to be. We are interested in one thing and one thing only: following and practicing the actual words and practices of Jesus the Nazarene and his disciples. So, anyway, I was reading this paper several weeks ago by a scholar named Shlomo Pines. It's quite the name, right? Shlomo Pines. I'm going to say it over and over again, probably. And anyway, it was a fascinating paper. This man, Shlomo Pines, wrote a paper called "The Jewish Christians According to a New Source." You should Google it. You should find it. You should read it. The bottom line is he was reading, and you should read the background story. He was studying. Okay, the TV turned off for some odd reason, so I'm going to pick up where I left off. Anyway, Shlomo Pines is a scholar that was reading and studying a text written by and believed to be an Islamic text. Yet, injected in the middle of this Islamic text, which was dated to a very, very old date, okay? He started analyzing this text and realized, wait, sandwiched in this Islamic text is actually a set of writings from an early Jewish Christian group, meaning likely the Nazarenes, the Ebionim, meaning Jesus's original disciples, the disciples of the disciples, the actual direct lineage. So it was accidentally preserved in this Islamic text in the middle of it. Like accidentally, before it was burned, by essentially the Roman pagan cult of Catholicism during the Templar conquests, right? The Crusades, right? Is we accidentally uncovered this preserved text. And it is a fascinating paper and something that I recommend you read. It's by Shlomo Pines, "The Jewish Christians According to a New Source." Anyway, I was reading this text and I came upon this almost throwaway line from the scholar Shlomo Pines. And I wanted to share it with you because I think it nicely reflects why Christianity and Catholicism is the dominant religion and belief system and theology system today, whereas the belief system of Jesus' actual disciples is not. And why is this important? Because we know that Jesus' disciples practiced certain things. They did not believe in things like the virgin birth, and they did not believe in the doctrine of Paul, wherein the only thing that matters is you get up and profess your faith in Jesus, that he died and was risen again, and then you're suddenly saved forever. That's an important point. We know that Jesus' disciples didn't believe that. Jesus never believed that. Jesus never said that. And there's other important things, like the fact that Jesus and his disciples were vegetarian, right? Wouldn't you think that that would be an important thing to actually practice and observe? Well, that's what we're going to get into. You see, on page 31 of Shlomo Pines' paper, he writes, "Thereupon, 318 men gathered in Nicaea and formulated a symbol of faith, which was accepted and made obligatory by Constantine." I mean, Constantine was the emperor, the ruler at the time, right? And people who dissented from this belief that these, 318, white-haired bishops and men, who were 300 years alive, 300 years after the death of Yeshua the Nazarene, after Jesus the Nazarene. People who dissented from whatever they decided was the truth were killed, and professions of faith differing from it were suppressed. So this is just one instance of it. We know that the Nazarenes, in their belief, they were scattered after the destruction of the temple in the Jerusalem temple in 70 CE. Those who survived that were then scattered, and a lot of them were persecuted and killed during the Bar Kokhba revolt in around 130 CE. And then the Nazarenes were attacked not only from the Jews at the time, the Orthodox rabbinic Jews, aka the Pharisees, and their surviving ones, they were also attacked by the Roman pagan cult and culture of Rome and the Greek culture. And later, which in around 300 years later, paradoxically became Catholic, thanks to Constantine. So, that is one quote that I want to share with you. The next one is, this is also from Shlomo Pines in the very next paragraph. It says, "In this way, people who professed the religion of Christ came to do all that is reprehensible. They worshipped the cross." And mind you, Jesus' disciples never worshipped the cross. No one that ever walked with Jesus and saw him die ever worshipped the cross. They would have seen a cross, which you see all over the place now, up on a hill or on people's necks, and say, "Hey, why do you have a Roman pagan torture device on your neck? That is disgusting. That is grotesque. I do not want to be reminded of that." Right? And they turned that thing into an idol. And we know that, I believe it's the second commandment, it says, "Do not take up any idol and worship an idol." And Shlomo Pines also says they observed the Roman religious rites and ate pork. Right? That is what Constantine wanted people to do. Observe the Roman religious rites and eat pork. Those who did not eat pork were killed. So, if you were killed for your beliefs, for what you knew that Yeshua taught and was true, you would probably not go out advertising it all over the place, right? Because you would be killed, which is why it is not documented as frequently as we would think, right? We know, thanks to people like Epiphanius and Eusebius and Hegesippus, of these practices that Jesus' followers were vegetarian, but we don't see it advertised and written about in surviving texts because they were persecuted, they were destroyed for sharing this stuff. Furthermore, in the very next paragraph, right after the previous one, it says, "Constantine continued for 50 years to put to death people who did not worship the cross and did not believe in the divinity of Jesus," which also is something that we know the Nazarenes and the Ebionites and Jesus' brother And and the disciples, they did not believe that Jesus was the Son of God. They believed that Jesus was who he said he was. Who did Jesus say he was? He said he was the Son of Man, Ben Adam in Aramaic, not some God man, which was concocted after Jesus's real story and real message was merged into the Roman pagan Greek culture. Thus, the religion he favored became consolidated. So, here's what we know. We know that history is written by the victors, and we see that firsthand. We see that laid out even by a council of faith in Constantine and the Council of Nicaea, which took place in the 4th century, which was supposed to be about a religion of love, which is all that Yeshua and Jesus, Yeshua aka Jesus, Yeshua is Jesus, by the way, in case you didn't know that. I'm seeing some comments. People are like, why are you using Yeshua? You know, I use them interchangeably. Anyways, theology was enforced by power. Dissent was punished by death. So Constantine really came forward, and he really changed everything. He created and put his stamp on Paul's doctrine. And Paul's doctrine was a doctrine that completely took off like crazy. Why? It's because if you want to live after you die, which is the core of everything, then all you have to do is say, hey, Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, and he rose after the 3rd day, and you'll be saved forever. Then Paul's disciples took that message and carried it forth, preached it everywhere, and finally, after a few hundred years, it was sponsored by Constantine. Not because Constantine was in love with the theology, he was just sick of the constant civil war and fighting between many different religions. I think it was Mithraism and Christianity, which were the two warring, competing religions, and Constantine essentially chose one. And he said, hey, we're going to choose one. This one is simple. There's one God. And we see that Constantine really changed everything. He chose, political unity over truth. That violence was used to essentially enforce belief. If you didn't believe in whatever Constantine and the 318 council members of Nicaea had to say, then you were persecuted, you were put to death, and you were forced, literally your head was put down onto a plate to eat flesh. Talk about a disgusting blood cult, right? Made to eat flesh of another dying, dead being. So, the Council of Nicaea, again, had 318 bishops. The creed imposed by imperial authority is the creed that you will hear anytime you step into a Catholic church. You're told to sit down, stand up like 50 different times in a Catholic Mass, and then stand up and you say, I believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty, the maker of everything. Why do we say that? Do we say that because Jesus said it? No. We say it because 318 psychopaths at the Council of Nicaea said that we need to say that. So, I ask you, why do you feel the need to pander and follow and embrace and hold dear the decisions and practices of 318 bishops in the 4th century instead of doing research and diving deep into who Jesus was and following him? That's the question. I want you to think about that and answer it honestly. While you do, I'm going to spit some more knowledge into your ears and carry forward. So, the alternative beliefs were erased. A lot of people think that the Council of Nicaea, you'll see priests talk about this as well, was all about, essentially all about, the Gnostics and Arianism and that set of, beliefs and practices. But it was about so much more than that. It was about what is going to be the state-sponsored religion that we can get behind and kill all other competing ideas. There are many different competing ideas because, why? Well, it's because the original followers and disciples of Jesus, of Yeshua, were scattered after the fall of Jerusalem in 70 CE. And they were scattered all over the place, so there was no, the Jerusalem church, which the Nazarenes, carried forth. It was led by James the Just, and James's right-hand man, Cephas, or Cephas, which is the rock. It's Peter. And then John the Apostle. Those three individuals formed the Jerusalem church, not some made-up Roman pagan cult church in Rome at the Vatican. The original disciples and their theology, their books were burned, their communities were destroyed, their traditions were silenced. But in this day and age, we are starting to see more and more connections and more texts being preserved, and texts that accidentally were stumbled upon by the likes of individuals like the scholar Shlomo Pines. And we even see remnants of the texts of the original Nazarenes preserved in Eusebius's work by Hegesippus, a Jewish Christian, even though we do not have Hegesippus's entire memoir or his account. So what remains today are fragments, quotations, lost gospels, and marginalized witnesses. This is what makes it so fun, so compelling, is you, the person watching this right now, are stumbling into a world where now we are an interconnected network of billions of people thanks to the internet, and now we are able to freely share our knowledge, our findings, our discoveries. And if you are watching, if you're interested, then I would call upon you to like and comment and share on my YouTube channel any findings and interesting things that you come across as well. That is what I do with my fellow Nasbros, my friends like Christian Sartain and James Benefico. And we have a group and we share our research, and that's what we need you to do and help us with as well. So comment on their channel, comment on my channel, and share what you have found and anything interesting that you come upon and stumble upon. And if you'd like a starter trail, a list of resources and books to read, I am working on our website for Nazarene Way Church. It's going to be absolutely epic. You're going to love it. And I'm going to be sharing a list of resources with you if you want to start this journey with us. So the Nazarene Way, let's recap, is our purpose, our focus is to follow Jesus the Nazarene. We don't want to follow Constantine. We don't want to follow Rome. We don't want to follow some imperial theology. We want to follow what is correct. We want to follow what is closer to the truth than the truth that has been fed to us at birth. Jesus the Nazarene, he taught mercy, not sacrifice. He practiced nonviolence. He was faithful to the Torah. If you're confused on what the Torah is, it's the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, which, just like Jesus read, you have to read with a critical eye. You have to parse out what is in there that is true versus what is in there thanks to the pen of the lying scribes, as Jeremiah shares in 8 verse 8. And thanks to my friend Cameron Waters, he turned me on to that realization, and that the prophet Jeremiah, was aware of this. There was a lot of scribes, a lot of the temple rulers that came and injected a lot of the rules and man-made rules to feed the coffers of the Sadducees and those who ran the temple. And so you got to watch out for those landmines, which are scattered throughout. Jesus came as what? As the Messiah. What does the Messiah mean? It does not mean God-man. It does not mean Son of God. It means anointed one. He was the anointed one who came back to share with us the actual true message of the nature of God. And there are 5 incredible properties of the nature of God, which I suggest you watch Aaron Abke's video discussing the 5 properties of God. So that is what Jesus the Nazarene stands for. The task before us is to recover the original way, to remove the pagan overlays ensconced and injected into Christianity and into Catholicism and into Eastern Orthodox, that religion. We need to relearn the authentic practice in the authentic way that Jesus stood for, that John the Baptist stood for, that James the Just stood for. The final challenge before us that I want to impart to you is that truth survives even when it's buried. Truth has this amazing ability to come to light. Our task as Nazarenes is not to sit idly, not to sit in the bleachers of some megachurch and shell out money to some pastor that has, 3 exotic cars and a Rolls Royce and a private jet like Joel Osteen. Our task as Nazarenes and as followers of Jesus, of Yeshua the Nazarene, is to dig deep and to read critically. Shabbat Shalom, ladies and gentlemen. Peace and love, and I will see you next week.